Welcome to this week's episode of Trek Live. It is July 31st. It's our second consecutive week. First time with two consecutive weeks since February. Really excited to be here. How you doing this morning, Dan?
Doing great. Stream looks good, so I think we're all good to go this morning. Really excited to do another character spotlight. In this character, we haven't. I feel like we've done some discussions here and there, but it's gonna be. I'm excited to do a deep dive into Q this morning.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to do Q. This is a unique character who has a pretty definable beginning, middle, and end at this point. Across multiple series. Jeff is in the chat, and he corrected me on my kind of initial post saying we were going to talk about this on Twitter. I had listed 4 shows. I said the TNG DS9, Voyager, and Picard. And he said, don't forget Lower Decks. And he is correct. Q was in Lower Decks. So 5 shows. And pretty much all of the 24th century into the 25th now era of Star Trek. Q is kind of a steady presence throughout those years of episodes. So now that Picard Season 2 is well in the books, and that season so heavily focused on Q and kind of resolving the Q character, I think it's a good time to do a character spotlight on him. This is our first character spotlight on somebody who's not a main credits like series regular, I believe. There's a playlist of character spotlights that we've done over the last couple of years. We've touched on Data, we've done the Daxes,
Yes.
we've done
Yeah.
Tess.
Yeah.
We've touched on a good handful. Dr. Pulaski, who actually might kind of be similar, I guess. She was. I don't know that she was.
Yeah.
She wasn't in the main credits, but she was pretty much a regular for that season. But this is our first true guest star, kind of recurring character. So should be interesting.
But Q is a little bit different from some other recurring characters because he has so many episodes and spans across a bunch of different shows. Yeah, so.
And he's evolved a lot. I think one of the things I'm looking forward to talking about is if you look at Q in those first handful of episodes when he's first introduced, and you look at him maybe in the middle and then look at him again at the end in Picard, there's definitely shifts in the way he's presented, the way Delancey plays him. There's a wide spectrum of tones and emotional focuses that drives Q, kind of depending on what the episode is and what the situation of the week is. He can be dangerous and scary and kind of really antagonistic, and he can almost be comedic relief and kind of go to the opposite end. And he's kind of arguably, I don't know what you're going to say about Q in your own opinion, but arguably he's, pretty well suited to do both and has had success in both kinds of tones. So interesting to unpack and think about.
Yeah, lots to talk about, for sure.
So we don't have a rewatch recap. We don't have any real big new news to touch on. Last week we started off with some Comic-Con fallout, right? I don't think there's been any major...
This is not a Star Trek related rewatch recap update at all, but I did watch a few episodes of... There is a great docu-series on Disney Plus about Industrial Light and Magic. It's not Star Trek related. It's kind of. I guess.
There's not a lot of
because ILM did a lot of visual effects for Star Trek, but it's just good, really nerd film stuff about special effects. So I'll mention that at the top of the show.
Yeah, I'll throw in and say that I'm caught up on. I've kind of sporadically been keeping up, not necessarily week to week, but I'll maybe get a few behind and then rattle a few off of the Orville this season on Hulu.
Nice.
And I gotta say, I'm really liking it. I've had a mixed relationship with the Orville since it's come out. I think we did an episode even on it back maybe after the first season of the Orville. It's kind of Star Trek adjacent. There are a lot of Brian Braga and Andre Bormanis and Robert Duncan McNeil's directed on it. Frakes is directed on it. James Conway's directed on it. There's a lot of Star Trek from the Berman era luminaries obviously involved with that show. It's clearly and obviously, unapologetically aiming for those touchstones of that era of Star Trek. And this season's been really good. In my opinion, at least, I think it's maybe a little bit less. I always found the first two seasons of it to be a little too consciously redundant of Star Trek. I mean, I felt like I would watch an episode of The Orville and say, "Oh, okay, this is like The Orville doing something like past prologue from Deep Space Nine." I think they like just pick a random episode of Star Trek, and it's kind of a retelling of an existing TNG or Deep Space Nine episode or something. And this season's really kind of expanded into its own thing, and it's clearly a homage to Trek, and it's very comfortable for anybody who loves that vibe. But it's as good as the show's ever been, and I hope it sticks around. There's a lot of talk about if it's done. Season 3 was... They kind of got unlucky the way Discovery got lucky. While both productions of Season 3 were underway, Discovery had just finished when COVID hit and shut everything down. Orville was like right in the middle of production, so it was like interrupted. They had to stop. They came back after COVID. The worst of the lockdown happened. So it was a really interrupted and chaotic production, and took a lot of time, and there hasn't been any renewal or anything yet, so everybody's kind of in the dark about if it's going to continue or not. I hope it does. I wouldn't have necessarily had a strong feeling on caring either way 6 months ago, but I'm a fan of the show now, and I'm really enjoying it, and I would encourage anybody out there who is here watching Trek Live because they obviously love that stuff. If you haven't checked out The Orville, be patient with it, even if you don't dig it right out of the gate with the first season. Stick with it, and I think it'll grow on you. I'm pretty confident in that.
Yeah, I still need to catch up on that. I think I've only watched the first season, so yeah.
You'd like it a lot.
Yeah,
I think it's your speed.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think we should just get right into Q, and kind of talk about whatever comes to mind for us. We as always, we kind of go into these kind of not overly prepared and overly scripted and structured in terms of what touch points we're going to hit. We're just going to let the conversation kind of take us where we go. And just speaking for myself, the first thing that kind of comes to mind for Q for me is his origin right out of the gate. He's featured heavily in Encounter at Farpoint, which is TNG's pilot. So the first time Trek has been back on TV since the original series, the first thing the original series of Star Trek. He's there and is prominently featured as the antagonist. And to me, he harkens right back to the original series. If you think about TOS, how many episodes of TOS feature, an antagonist?
All-powerful, menacing. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. It's such a hallmark of that show, and it's such a, one of the early criticisms of The Next Generation in that first season is that they were regurgitating too many ideas from the original series and not totally embracing,
something
story-wise,
new.
the new.
Yeah.
Retelling The Naked Time as The Naked Now. There's other episodes in those early days that are kind of clearly aiming at the same things the original series had done. And this is kind of no different. I mean, you think of Where No Man Has Gone Before, Charlie X, Squire of Goth has come immediately to mind. Gene Roddenberry was obviously very fascinated with the idea that even as we advance and get to a point where we can travel interstellar space and be that far along, there will be things that we encounter that make us look like insects or like lower life forms. And that's something that he clearly was interested in exploring in different kinds of ways through those kinds of episodes. And right out of the gate with The Next Generation, we're there doing it again. And in those early days, Q is a menace. I mean, he is not friendly.
Yes.
He's putting humanity on trial for its past transgressions and is trying to decide. The Q Continuum is trying to decide if humanity has earned the right to be in interstellar space and explore strange new worlds and do the Star Trek mission, basically. Have they earned that right, and are they worthy of being out there? And that's kind of our kickstart to The Next Generation. Picard having to defend humanity's advancement and improvements, and have we come far enough? And like I said, it's kind of jarring knowing the way that I think Q is perceived all these years later, and knowing where he ends up, and the kind of character he evolves into, with much more of kind of a tongue-in-cheek sense of humor and a little bit more of a self-awareness and a really comfortable sort of fun back and forth with Picard at times. In Encounter at Farpoint, he's deadly serious. and it's a really different tone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoy Q because yeah, he is very menacing at the beginning, and his even his species is such a crazy sci-fi concept that even that we don't understand. Like
Yeah,
this is
the continuum. Yeah.
such a higher level form of life that we just don't understand. But I try to think about this in a way that helps me because in the middle of Q's run, I feel like he kind of gets overused at some points. But for me, I like I try to in my head canon, I try to just kind of spin it to Q becomes just fascinated with our species, and that's why we see him so much.
Yeah.
And I think just the progression of him is just him getting to know us and kind of back and forth, him changing our perspective on what's out there.
Yeah.
Like I think if I remember right, he introduces us to the Borg.
Yes.
How pivotal is the Borg to Star Trek
Mm-hmm.
now?
There.
So
Yeah.
it's I think it's just we as much as he changes our path as humanity, we change his, and so
Yeah.
I love that progression just through the show, and I think that helps it smooth over some episodes that I'm not too hot on. So um, I just really enjoy the Q character for that just relationship and that growth and that beginning and end, which I'm really happy that Picard actually went there. So
Yeah, me too. I think my kind of headcanon and sort of I think it's pretty well explained actually. You know, the later you get, and especially in the at the very end of Picard, he talks about his connection to Picard and
mm,
the way that he kind of has grown to respect him, and even gods have favorites, he says.
yeah,
And he, I think when you go back to Encounter 4 and have that first encounter with Q take place the way that it does, Q puts him on trial, puts humanity on trial, and Picard's sort of the stand-in, and Picard wins the argument against this omnipotent,
God, yeah,
godlike entity, and I think that fascinates Q, that he was proven
willing to, yeah,
wrong, or that Picard made a good argument, and that trial was going to continue. And I think that I guess my headcanon reading on that kind of whole idea that the trial never ends is maybe not the continuum has closed the book and is not really interested in humanity anymore post
but
Encounter
Q
4. But
himself,
Q is. That's
yes,
where Q in Q's mind, he's continuing monitoring and observing, and
yeah,
is personally interested in not just humanity but Picard.
hmm
Where it gets interesting is in introducing Q into other shows, other sets of characters, and maybe
yeah,
the wisdom of that, and the how much do you like or love or dislike that kind of, I think, will vary by person. But through his relationship with Picard, I think it starts off at a point where it makes sense that he will come back and be a recurring force in the next generation. Um, and he bookends that show, and kind of even continues to bookend it. He bookends it in All Good Things. Like, this is the premiere and the finale of the Next Generation, and he's at the end of, he's in a season and heavily featured in Picard, which is like the sort of final epilogue to the Next Generation. It seems the sort of like pin at the end of it that's going to tie up these characters and tell us a little bit more
hmm
at the end of their journeys. Um, and Q is included there. So,
hmm
yeah, I think, like you said, having him introduce humanity to the Borg, and kind of, I think, probably knowing, in my mind, I think he kind of alludes to the fact that, if you're going to be out here and continue to push, you have to know what's out here. In his mind, in Q's eyes, he's doing humanity a favor by, like, giving them a tip that these things are out here. And
yeah,
the Borg is an example of something that, like me, like Q, is very other, and is a threat to humanity in a way that you don't see coming, and can't be reasoned with, and can't be, there's no dialogue to have in the traditional sense, especially as we see the Borg and Q Who and Best of Both Worlds. It gets more complicated as things go, of course. But
Yeah.
his I think one of the beauties of Q Who as an episode is, if you're in Picard's shoes, you think Q is screwing you hardcore. Like, he's putting his ship and his crew in harm's way.
But from Q's perspective,
he's doing humanity a favor.
Yeah, trying to tell them, hey, you guys aren't ready for it to tackle some of the stuff that's out here.
And if you're not ready for a little bloody nose, you shouldn't be out here, he says.
Yes.
There's real complexity to that, again, in the relationship between not just humanity and the Q, but Picard and the individual Q. That I think really works well in those early episodes, especially. I think at Q Who, I can make, in my head, it's pretty easy for me to talk myself into Q Who being my favorite, like, real Q heavy focused episode, because of that kind of stuff. I think the complexity of the relationship. I mean, All Good Things is there, and that's really hard as the finale. Yeah. Tapestry's right there too, and Q's amazing there. But it's kind of like, it's one of those kind of weird things in my head. It's like a Q episode, or
like,
where's the focus?
Yeah, it's focused on Picard, really.
Right. Q's almost like a plot device to get Picard to do what
true.
he's doing.
True.
And he's there, and the relationship that the two characters have built over the years is kind of in its fullest form by that point. The chemistry and the witty back and forth is kind of peaking in Tapestry, and a lot of the juice that really drives that episode is in that relationship. So Q's really critical, but I think we learn more about Q, and there's more meat on the bones for Q as a character and as an entity in Q Who. So if I was like going to showcase Q, if we were doing like let's introduce kind of a newbie to Q. I think Q Who probably is maybe in my mind the best way to go if you had an hour to show somebody what Q's all about.
But it's interesting too, because Q's always about like how his perspective is so different from ours. Like, we have this linear time perspective, but he jumps around from places to place and has seen so much. I just think it's interesting that he's so fascinated with humanity.
Yeah, I think, in true Star Trek form, whether it's Q, whether it's the Vulcans in Enterprise, I think we come across a lot of examples of kind of different alien species who are more advanced than us at those times, kind of looking at humanity and saying, you kind of scare us because you are progressing in a way that is great, and is you're on a road of real kind of enlightenment, which is true, like Roddenberry philosophy for what humanity is capable of and everything. I think that Star Trek kind of returns to that as sort of a tentpole value consciously, and I think Q is one of those steps along the way that it's that's one of the reasons he's drawn to us, is it's a mechanism to show the audience and to sing your song about humanity can get there, and Star Trek's about, yes, we can get to those great advancements and become enlightened, and it's not dystopian, and having these kinds of relationships are kind of core to that principle. Jeff is in the chat and says, all good things, Q Who and Death Wish, which is a Voyager episode, which I guess maybe we're bouncing around a lot, which I think, for my money, is good. I kind of like the fluid conversation. But The Next Generation features a lot of really varied episodes, like we were kind of talking about right at the beginning, that his tone kind of shifts, and he kind of ranges from hardcore, very heavy, serious Q Who, Encounter at Farpoint,
comic relief,
comic stuff, and Deja Q's pretty funny, Cupid's very funny. We have episodes like that, and then we'll touch on some of these episodes in a bit, but he eventually kind of transitions into other shows as well, as we kind of touched on. He's in Deep Space Nine once, and he's in Voyager 3 times. Death Wish being one of them, one of the episodes that Jeff mentions here. Which, for my money, is probably the most successful of the 3. And probably the most successful non-Picard-centric Q episode. What do you think about Q's kind of expansion outside of the Next Generation? Or do you have you ever, like, when you think back, like, did you, like, well, your experience is different because you started with Voyager, right? Like, you probably saw these Voyager episodes involving
So when I got
Fury.
to TNG, my perspective was just different. It was more of a comic relief. It almost felt like a 180 for that character because I had known him as this really lighter character. But when I get to TNG, he's much more serious and much more menacing, and he has more teeth, it seems like, and he feels more dangerous and he feels more foreign in Next Generation. But when he gets to Voyager, such an established character, I think his personality comes out a little bit more. But I think Q is more successful when he has some weights to the episode, like Death Wish. Like that's such a mental health type of episode. But it's also, even a counter at Farpoint, we have this really big trial going on that's kind of have this big open-ended question: is humanity isn't ready and shouldn't be out here and has to pay for what they've done. So I just think that anytime Q, I don't know, I think Q is more successful when he has those big things to tackle, or he challenges our perspective when we go into jumping into different parts of history, or like for instance, like Tapestry, or even All Good Things, where we change one little detail and see how the butterfly effect changes that whole thing. So I just really, which I don't know, it's tough to say, but I think that's when Q is more successful in these other shows.
I mean, I would agree with that. I think Q, the reason Death Wish is so strong is I think it's such a kind of classic Star Trek morality play about like a real world issue. It takes something that's real life for us in the 20th or 21st century and extrapolates it out to, a more complicated science fiction idea, but its bones are us.
But is that a Q-centered episode, you think? As similar to something like Tapestry or some of these other episodes?
He's pretty heavily featured, but he's also he's a supporting player in that episode. The real kind of protagonist there, outside of our crew, is the other Q, the Q who wants to commit suicide. John Delancey is sort of, he's central and he has a lot to do, but the story's not really driven by him. He's there as an antagonist for the other Q, and I think his presence is more deeply felt as a wow. It's Q. He's in Voyager. It's a big deal that he's continuing on as a character post the Next Generation in the timeline, and he's. I think the reason that episode works so well is it does kind of feel like a throwback because of, like you said, the serious thematic stuff about suicide and there's dramatic weight there and real issues there that feel important in a way that maybe some of the Q stuff hadn't in some time. Like Tapestry is another example like this. I think later on, where you're dealing with an episode that deals with a lot of heft. But as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, that episode's so like laser focused on Picard's journey, and Q is sort of just the vehicle to get him there.
Yeah.
And Death Wish also, you mentioned earlier, kind of in our early thing, or in the early part of this conversation, that even the Q continuum as a whole is something that we can't wrap our head around. It's unknowable. And Death Wish is the episode that they find a way to like kind of transport us there. And they have to figure out a way to like visually make it understandable to lowly humans, and they come up with this this visual representation that is not true and not really the continuum, but is designed to articulate what the continuum feels like. And so there are some new things that are new layers of nuance for what the continuum is and who Q is, I guess, that are offered in Death Wish, that I think really makes that episode feel like a standout. But it's an interesting, I think the best assets of Q are is his relationship to Picard. His best asset is his relationship to Picard. So when you remove him from that, I don't think that, in my mind, it never completely feels as comfortable on these other shows. Like, to me, what I buy his the element of Q's fascination with humanity that I most have the easiest time buying is his fascination with Picard. I think that's the thing that gets the best sold over the course of the Next Generation. So when you remove Picard from the equation, I have a tougher time. Death Wish does create a scenario where Voyager stumbles into this.
But he's more of a support character, like you said.
Yeah, he doesn't come to Voyager, for any reason other than Voyager stumbled into a situation that called for him to come. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't go to Voyager to visit. If Voyager doesn't hit that comet and beam imprison Q out of it, John Delancey never shows up on Voyager. So I think maybe that's the reason that, for me, I have an easier time getting there in that episode. So yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. I think Death Wish is excellent episode. I think I have it in my top 100, actually. Really good. Deja Q's another one, though. Deja Q's an interesting one in that he's in the Next Generation once a season, except for season 5. He's not in the season 5 episode, but each year it's kind of like one of those back in the day, especially in the Next Generation. It was like once a season you're going to get Q, you're going to get Loaxana Troy, you're going to get Klingons. Like, at least once you're going to get these kind of hallmark things. And season 3's Q episode is Deja Q, and that's kind of the first time that I think you get a full embracing of the comedic idea that play into Delancey's sense of humor and his comedic chops. His powers are taken away from him. He chooses to spend time to spend his mortal life as a human, and asks to come to the Enterprise to do that because of his connection to Picard and humanity. And comedic stuff ensues. And to me, like, that's a great episode in my mind because of the nuance that it unlocks in his character. A lot of the stuff with Data in it is really, really nice. There's an interesting kind of pairing of Delancey being made mortal and made human and not wanting to be, and Data wanting that more than anything, and those two characters kind of coming into contact and having a nice little relationship because of that yin and yang. But that's sort of the if you don't like the lighter Q, that's the episode that's kind of responsible for setting us off on that. This is what Q is. Q is going to be, light and bring. When you see a trailer for an upcoming Q episode, you kind of know what you're in for. It's going to be comedic. It's going to be funny, and it's kind of TNG's key to doing some comedy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess is that comedy aspect of Q successful then?
I think it is, because I do think it's funny. I think it's consistently. I think it delivers good humor in a show that wasn't always comfortable delivering humor, like on a regular basis. I mean, Data's funny at times. TNG's funny in like a one-liner kind of a sense. Pretty often you'll get a funny line from Q, or you'll get a cute quip from Data, not understanding humanity with Geordi or something. But TNG's not a show, that I think typically is comfortable living in a comedic place. And Q does offer, like I said, a key into that at times. So I think it helps to give the show a little bit more of a three-dimensional, reach in terms of genre.
And to keep that character kind of fresh.
Yeah.
Because I think we've, to this point, right, we've done the serious, menacing type of character a couple times. So now it's just interesting to see, I guess, that transition from that serious kind of role to more of a comedic type of perspective now.
Yeah, I think it's much. I think it's very likely that if Q maintained his sort of tone and voice from Farpoint,
Counter
Hidden
Farpoint.
Q,
Yeah.
Q Who, you run you run a high risk of becoming one note,
Yeah.
kind of
Mustache
predictably.
twirling.
Mustache, you can
Yeah.
become that
Yeah.
if you lean too heavily or you put your thumb on the scale a little too much on those kinds of traits. And
Hmm.
this does give him, a three dimensionality, a more fleshed out evolution and arc uh, that I think culminates well, and I think returning
Hmm.
to the more serious, very serious kind of voiced Q at the end here in Picard season 2 is made more. To me, that jars me when I watch it. In an episode like Penance, the second episode of the season, when in the beginning of the episode he's got that big long scene with Picard, kind of explaining what's happening, and Q is clearly agitated and not well, and
Yeah. Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
delivering these like almost Shakespearean like
Monologues. Yeah.
monologues to Picard about all these things. Like to me, that's like that's more effective and more jarring because of the perception of Q had changed, and that his the back and forth with Picard became what it is in Tapestry and in True Q and in Cupid. Like episodes like that became the standard,
Back
more
banter
playful
back and
back and
forth.
forth,
Yeah.
old married couple kind of a back and forth, uh,
Yeah.
not slapping him and drawing blood like he does in Penance. Like to me, that delivers because of that nuance and the
Mhm.
change. So I'm glad for it. Um,
Yeah.
mhm.
If you think about it, it's almost a step back to old school
Farpoint,
Q,
yeah.
where Farpoint, where he would just like freeze crewmen and kill
Mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah, he's much more deadly serious,
Mhm.
and there's a danger there. I mean, Q. I
Yeah.
think in Picard season 2, Q is perfectly content to let history change and let that be that. And if Picard
Mhm.
fails, he fails. Like I don't think he's you know playing with him, and it's not necessarily a game that he'll just reset. Because I don't know that he has
Yeah.
the ability to do that because of his
Hmm.
declining health. Um, but he pretty well sells in Picard that he ain't playing.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
in
to
the
this
same way that
point,
he wasn't in Farpoint.
yeah, to this point, we're comfortable with the comedic Q that we've known, since um, Voyager.
Yeah,
But I guess it makes sense because in the trailer he was in this dark um,
yeah,
costume that just made him kind of feel a little bit more menacing and
mm-hmm.
back to old
More
school
serious.
Q.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think yeah, I really emphasize the even Picard. I think his being taken aback in character when he's slapped and he's like, whoa, something's off here. Like that comes from Picard's comfort zone with Q
It
is
slaps us out of the comfort
yeah.
zone,
It's
right?
like wait a minute, this isn't normal Q,
Yeah.
and this is a change, and I think that's really well done. Um, Rob's here and is talking about loving. Rob's obviously a huge Voyager fan, um, and talking about loving Q's relationship with Janeway, which maybe we touch on here, kind of maybe transitioning. Like we mentioned a couple minutes ago, talking about Death Wish. It's one of 3 episodes in
Hmm.
Voyager, and he does develop kind of an independent relationship with Janeway from the Picard thing. Like it's very different, but it's kind of equally important, I guess, for the Q character at the time.
Hmm.
He wants to in the Q and the Gray. He wants to mate with somebody and expand the Q species, and he selects Janeway for that job, which brings about all kinds of shenanigans. And then in Q2, he comes back with a son that he doesn't have with Janeway, with another Q, but Janeway's the godmother of that young Q.
Yeah.
What do you think of outside of Death Wish and looking at those 3 episodes as a whole and kind of thinking about Q as you saw him in Voyager? Uh, what kinds of things come to mind? Like, do you think?
Hmm. I I think Q is just going to be. It's just going to. His fascination with Picard is obviously going to spill over to another captain or captains.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't. I like that. I like the idea of because the captain, at least with Janeway and her relationship and her romantic involvements, always seem forbidden for whatever reason. I guess that all captains really,
Yeah, right.
seem really forbidden and
They tend to
private. And I
hesitate
think
to do that, right?
for my money, I think that's interesting that all like Q knows right where to push and right where he wants to
Yeah.
step, and I think that kind of makes sense for him to go there. But um, I'm not too interested in it, and there's some stuff in there that's good, but yeah, I again, like I said at the top of the show, I prefer more where he tackles some of these tougher stuff that pushes my perspective on because the whole thing about the Q is their whole way of life is different and isn't linear and is never ending. So it's different than our perspective. So whenever we go that way, I think is more successful.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the stuff with Janeway, I can probably leave, but also there's some the Death Wish is fantastic. That's definitely in my top 3 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's tackling a heavier handed type of topic, which I think is inherently Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
especially from the beginning.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. You know, I think John Delancey and Kate Mulgrew have a good vibe. They have good chemistry that I think helps. I'm not as emotionally invested in the relationship on the merits. I think maybe because, like I said, when I think of Q, I really do think of the relationship with Picard first and foremost, and his kind of his place in the Next Generation. I think is where it feels the most comfortable to me.
yeah,
But I think maybe the thing that Voyager did that Deep Space Nine didn't when Deep Space Nine tried to incorporate Q is at least Voyager did it like deep into season 2. Voyager was kind of off and running, had established itself as a show. Like the Next Generation, it's on a starship. It's traveling through space. It's very episodic. It's easy to kind of hop in, have a quick thing, hop out onto the next, and then
yeah,
maybe bring it back the next year. I think Deep Space Nine bringing Q in the 6th or 7th episode right out of the gate when it's trying to establish itself as a whole new thing on a space
Q-less,
station in
yeah,
Q-less. I think that falls more flat, and I think that episode is probably, at least in my experience, not viewed successfully, and probably help determine or probably played into the decision not to continue to do that, not to bring him back. I also think Deep Space Nine, more so than the Next Generation and Voyager, because of the nature of who their characters were and the kind of show they were building, had a more comfortable relationship with humor, like woven into the show
big time.
through its characters like Q and the complicated relationships that were happening around the station. I think Deep Space Nine had tools at its disposal to play with humor more easily without having to bring in outside influences. Unlike the Next Generation and Voyager, I think felt the need to do that, to do the humor more comfortably, or to go for broke with a comedy episode. You think about Deep Space Nine, you think about comedies, and what were they usually? Like Ferengi episodes tended to be like the balls to the wall comedy episodes, and they were assets that they had as part of the cast that were well into the tapestry of the show. So you know, I don't think they needed that, and I think they knew they didn't need that. Where Voyager probably felt more inclined to grab from the same bag of tricks that the Next Generation had, which maybe led to the more recurring nature of Q in Voyager as opposed to Deep Space Nine.
True.
In addition to the fact that Q-less is not seen much as a success, especially compared to Death Wish, which is Q's first episode in Voyager. Like, there's a more successful, origin point for that character in that show than the Deep Space Nine.
That's interesting. I don't know. I always try to lean into my headcanon. But is that why you think Q sticks around so much in Voyager? Is because the first episode was so successful and they were trying to capture it a little bit more?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I also think the showrunners of Voyager were
So
Michael Piller, Jerry Taylor,
yeah,
Brendan Braga
from
were
TNG.
TNG royalty right there.
Yeah.
Who had written Q a lot in the Next Generation. All three of them had like show-run episodes that featured Q. Deep Space Nine, Ira Stephen Bear, maybe a little bit less emotionally connected to Q as a character, as the showrunner. I think it's probably that, but also, yeah, I do think maybe the fact that Death Wish was such a success and is seen, even back then, I think was seen as a really really strong outing.
In my mind, it's because that's why Q sticks around, is because he had such an interesting experience with
Voyager.
dealing with Janeway with the other Q.
Yeah, and you think about it, like Janeway does at the end of at the end of Death Wish with that trial, they kind of come to a bit of a compromise, and there's
they settle, right?
They kind of do. I mean, Janeway rules in favor of the suicidal Q, but there's ongoing dialogue between Janeway and Q as the trial kind of goes, and I think you're right. I think Q does have an interesting experience with Janeway, and is kind of maybe I can buy in my headcanon, like you keep saying. Headcanon's such a big deal for people like you and me to kind of connect these dots and to make everything kind of settle into a really comfortable place. You can see how what's Q's first experience with Picard? A trial. Q's first experience with
you're right. Yeah.
Trial. Go through this sort of
the similarities. Yeah,
that he would be kind of drawn back to Janeway as he kind of met his match a little bit and or found maybe a bit of not an intellectual equal, and you can't be equal to Q, but somebody who can at least mount a defense against Q in the form of Janeway. So a lot of interesting parallels there.
Yeah,
that I wasn't thinking about before, and it's beauty having conversations like this.
Mm-hmm.
Never saw that parallel between Farpoint and Death Wish. But
feels like, well, I don't know. It feels like lower stakes, but it also, I feel like the weight is very similar. And again, it's in true Star Trek fashion. Those both two episodes leave you with, I got some things to think about.
It's lower stakes for humanity for sure. I mean, if you think about Farpoint, it's putting humanity on trial, and the effect of that decision is going to impact humanity. Death Wish, the big deal, and the reason Q is so invested in this is it's unprecedented for a Q to take their own life, and Q is inherently immortal, and they're not supposed to die. What is the effect of setting a precedent that when a Q's bored and wants to be done, they can just check out? That's the stakes are on Q in that episode, not on us.
That's true. Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, it's higher stakes for the Q than it is for humanity, whereas in Farpoint it's kind of the other way around.
Yeah, right. We're kind of the shoes on the other foot. We're making a decision.
Yeah.
For Q, that's going to impact their civilization.
Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Definitely a Snaptrack episode.
Yeah.
Those two.
Shoot that over to Jen.
Yeah.
That's a
good parallels there, for sure.
So, we talked a bit last week about Picard Season 2, and, just kind of as a whole. And Picard, Q obviously appears in Lower Decks as well, very quick in and out as a sort of cameo. And it's funny. I mean, that to me, that works. I mean, that's fine for
it works.
But he's obviously not the focus of anything there. It's more of like a quick joke, but we get to see him in the Farpoint garb.
Again.
The judge.
Yeah.
The judge stuff, which is cool. But in Picard, that's where the real meat, in terms of the new Trek, the continuation of the story into this new era comes from, and it's resolving Q.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you feel about the end of Q? Not so much Picard season 2 as a whole, unless it really factors into your thoughts on the ending. But like, when you think about how Q ends as a character at the end in that finale and towards the back end of the season, how do you feel about Q dying? Like the decision to have him confront. He calls it. He's not comfortable with the term death in it. He kind of says, he says something like, I'm transitioning or something to another plane or something. He doesn't love the term death and isn't convinced that that's actually what's happening to him. But he knows something's happening and he's not going to be around anymore. What do you think?
I thought it was done pretty well. I think it definitely bookends the character, and really, I would love to have seen this. Maybe I don't know if they could have done that, but it would have done really well if we could have bookended. The I guess they're saying the last season of Picard as season 3 with something like this, but I think I haven't gone through it, but I think when you do get news like this, I think it does cause you to lash out. And I think in true Q fashion, like we've seen him do this before, where he'll change a little detail and it'll completely flip how just the reality of our situation here. So I think it definitely makes sense of how we would end it, and we got some good stuff with the backstory with Picard, which I think I think Q wanted, because I like the I like the relationship with Picard and Q, because Q didn't want Picard to end up like this. Q didn't want Picard to end up alone. And I just think that you're seeing the true colors. Maybe not in the middle of the season. Like, why is Q doing this? But the ending, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the power of it is in the even gods have favorites, Jean-Luc. That whole thing.
Yeah, that line for sure.
And that kind of admitting that I keep coming back because I'm interested in you, and I've kind of taken a liking to you, and Q knowing that he's going out alone and doesn't feel like he's made a connection that
with anyone but
Picard. Picard's the closest thing to that connection that he has. So when he feels that I'm running out of time and I need to do something for somebody, or have one last kind of hurrah with somebody, his go-to is Picard, and I think that speaks volumes. And like you said, the kind of gift that he gives him in the way that Q would do it, like he does in Tapestry, is he kind of gives him he makes him walk the walk in terms of like seeing the effect of things in his past and how they affect his future, and what things he needs to learn to accept about himself so that he can move forward and be like the best version of himself, the way he does in Tapestry. In this, he goes further back and is not aiming at like you're worrying about your career and why you're the kind of captain you are, or wishing that you did something different in your past, in your upbringing. This is more like an emotional, why are you afraid to,
let somebody in
and be your true self with somebody in that intimate way, and don't end up like me. And to me, like that's what makes season 2 of Picard worthy of being there. Like that, like if the show is called Star Trek Picard, it's about Picard.
Yeah.
And it's an anomaly. It's an offshoot. It's a different kind of show. It's not about a ship. The name of the ship is not the name of the show. It's not about a crew and a found family. It's about diving into a character that exists. and what makes that person. And to me, the thing that does work about the show is it's exploring facets of the character that are true and are kind of there from day one. Picard's kind of closed, kind of reserved, pretty uptight kind of person.
Yep.
And as a pretty reserved, uptight kind of person at times, I relate. And Picard season 2 is really getting at why and you know what do you need to do to maybe work on that. And I think Q delivering that is kind of perfect. And yeah, you're right. I mean, would it have been really cool to have Q come back and interact with the crew of the Next Generation in like season 3, or have him involved in the story like that? Sure, of course.
But now, what I think about it, it's always been it's always been Picard.
Yes. Yeah, I mean that's it. I mean, putting him in season 3 with all these other characters, yeah, that would have been fine, and that would, I'm sure, would have been great. But you know, do you really care about Q's relationship with Worf or with Dr. Crusher? No, not really. I mean, it's cool to see, but there is no the reason that Q is so fascinating to me, is, especially in that dynamic, is with Picard. So having him in season 2, where those other characters aren't there, and they can really kind of focus on his connection to that one character and have it be about Picard's backstory and have it be more of an intimate tale between those two, it was, you know, you can argue about the execution of it and does it hold together as a 10 episode story, and what the strengths and weaknesses of it are on those, you know, bigger, wider scope kind of grounds. But I think the idea was sound.
Yeah.
And there are scenes that I'm telling you, if you just can find like a YouTube clip of the Patrick Stewart, John Delancey scenes from season 2 of Picard, they play like gangbusters. They are great scenes.
Yeah.
And they when I watch season 2, that's what really resonates with me. Those scenes just land, and a lot of it is because of the things we've kind of leaned heavily into in this conversation, the change in the relationship and the change in Q's personality over the course of it. Seeing him the way that he is in season 2 is so, like, kind of blows you to the back of your seat a little bit with, like, well, what is going on here?
Yeah. So we're happy with how the Q character ends.
I am. I think so. I mean, as if he is a reflection of Picard, like if his best asset is his ability to play off of Picard and to reveal, you know, parts of Picard's personality, and to give Picard, you know, a foil of that sort. I think the way he ends up, and the way that he kind of attempts to unlock a piece of Picard at the end of his life is satisfying to me. And I think the journey of the ups and downs and the changes in his relationship with humanity, and Picard more specifically, lead to that happening in a way that's satisfying. You know, I think it's a pretty good arc.
Because you know, Q came to judge humanity, but really stayed to explore and learn about his relationship with Picard.
Yes.
And how that develops. So,
right.
Yeah, just interesting from a being that has been alive for eons and explored so many different places and then galaxies and then people. I just find it interesting. His relationship with Picard.
Definitely. It's kind of sad to see him go. I mean, I think we're about to feel this in season 3. People who are really connected emotionally to the Next Generation, you know, there's almost like kind of a weird comfort to not having the characters have final resolutions, whether it's death or you know, some just sort of like final ending where you kind of know that's it. That kind of not having that happen allows you to imagine, you know, that character continuing on. What are they doing, you know, off screen, things that you don't get to. Now the Q has like that kind of a a period at the end of his story.
Are there other characters like that we've had? I guess it always ends in death, right?
Usually, I mean, quite possibly for Q too. But whatever happened to him, he's nothing's ever final in Star Trek. A writer could come along with an idea and he could come back in any number of ways. But I feel it's kind of bittersweet that I think is probably teeing up feelings that we're going to get in season 3 of Picard. I don't know. I have no reason to think that they're going to be killing off Next Generation characters in spades or anything, and kind of hope they don't. But it's sort of a teeing up of that. The end is coming kind of feeling. That I'm sure season 3 is probably going to be leaning heavily into. Like this is the one last adventure kind of vibe. And so yeah, I mean a lot of characters like different recurring characters like Ducat and people in Deep Space Nine have kind of similarly probably final endings that that allow you to look at a character like Ducat's another one that you could. It's one show. It's a little different than this, but you could look at it and say there's a beginning, middle, and an end to that story for that.
And he has a great relationship and rapport with Sisko.
Yeah, he's probably the closest, I think, to Q. With kind of like that constant presence throughout a show and that book ending, just like Q. Ducat is kind of Sisko's adversary and emissary, and in What You Leave Behind, it all kind of begins and ends there for the lead of the show. Q's just a little different because of how he branches out. If you think about the 24th century of Star Trek, it's TNG, DS9, Voyager, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Picard. Prodigy out of the equation because of how unique that is. Q's in all of them. The only thing Q's not in are the outside of that, like that time.
Enterprise.
So if you're looking at like a timeline graphic of Trek, that window of it, Q's in all of it, and that's obviously unique.
The mark at that time.
Yeah.
But who knows? We could, and with the stuff in Voyager, we realized that there's other Q that we can run into, and so
no doubt.
John Delancey might be done, but the Q, if you can call it a species, whatever they are, an entity. Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting thing
it's
that I
never
wish,
done.
Maybe it's intentional. It's kind of nebulous. So it's not totally clear when you're watching Picard season 2. Is this happening to all Q or is it happening to this Q?
Yeah, that's the unknown.
Yeah, we don't.
Which I kind of appreciate.
Yeah,
and I like the idea of, because the universes and in these dimensions are so vast, that Q are so sporadic and they're not, all over the place.
Yeah.
So
something that I wish Star Trek would do more often, honestly, that the original series did a good bit, and Picard season 2 kind of does with the ending of Q, with a lot of unanswered questions. I give Children of the Comet from Strange New Worlds a lot of credit for this too. We shouldn't have all the answers. I feel like Star Trek maybe a little too often ties things into
does try to do that. Yeah,
through technobabble, through really good censors.
You have to have the explanation.
Yeah, I love the fact that in Children of the Comet that it ends where they're like, I don't really know what that freaking thing was. Like, and we shouldn't. Like there should be things in the universe that we encounter that are like, I don't even know what that was. Like, I don't understand it. I don't know how it works. I don't know what it was. I don't know. And like in the original series, through these kinds of things, like these godlike entities, they should be unknowable. We shouldn't have, a tricorder shouldn't tell us everything about everything. So I think Q gives us that it's unknowable. I love that in Death Wish, like, you can't come to the Continuum, you won't understand any of it. Like, it's not something that you can, like, they have to modify it and give them a holodeck version of it so that they can even wrap their head around what they're looking at. I love that, and I wish Star Trek could do it more often than they do.
I think that's a good note to end on.
I think so too. We're about an hour in. appreciate everybody stopping by. We'll be back next week. I don't remember exactly what our topic is for next week.
I think it's
Oh, yeah.
unseen locations.
Yeah,
Which,
we're gonna
yeah,
touch
should
on
be fun.
things that are implied on screen, things that we know exist because of dialogue, maybe, or blueprints, things like
Yeah,
areas of the ship,
technical manuals.
areas
Yeah,
that
yeah,
get talked about that we don't necessarily see in on
yeah.
the various shows. Should be a neat thing to touch on for 45 minutes or an hour. So.
Yep. Sounds good.
Sweet. Thanks, everybody, for watching. This should be available on our podcast feed down the road. It's always here on YouTube. You can check us out as a recorded version, but best way to experience this is always if you're up early in the United States, Sunday mornings, live stream, be a part of the conversation. You can help drive what we talk about through the chat. And everybody's welcome.
Yep. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Thanks Rob and Jeff for stopping in and helping us drive the conversation. And
Always.
we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks everybody.